I'm sure people ask you this all the time. Is there going to be another sequel? And what's more, is Freddy really dead?
Of course he is. Freddy's dead and gone.
A few weeks ago, I got a call from Wes, and he pitched me this really exciting idea. And I started thinking, who better to resurrect Freddy than his creator? Look, Heather, let me cut to the chase. How would you like to join us in the definitive nightmare?
I thought you killed Freddy off.
Well, we did. But the fans, the fans, God bless them, they're clamoring for more. I guess evil never dies, right?
I wish I could tell you where this script was going, Heather. The fact is, I don't know. I dream a scene at night, I write it down in the morning. Beyond that, your guess is as good as mine where it's going.
Bob, how long has Wes been working on this script?
I don't know, a couple months. Why?
And since you've been thinking of making it, has anything funny happened?
What do you mean?
Like weird phone calls. Well, in this nightmare in progress, then, does this thing have any weaknesses?
Well, it can be captured sometimes.
Captured? How?
And by storytellers, of all things. I mean, every so often they imagine a story good enough to sort of catch its essence, and then, for a while, it's held prisoner in the story.
Like the genie in the bottle.
Exactly. However, it happens when the story dies, and the evil is set free.
You're saying Freddy is this ancient thing?
Right. Current version. And for 10 years, he's been held captive pretty much as Freddy in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but now that the films have ended, the genie's out of the bottle. He's decided to cross over out of films into our reality.
Have you seen any of the script by any chance?
No, Wes won't show it until he's finished. At least that's what he told me.
Well, when is it going to be done?
Well, the way he's writing, who knows? So weird.
Robert, have you been having nightmares?
I think the only way to stop him is to make another movie. When that time comes, you're gonna have to make a choice.
Choice? What kind of choice?
Whether or not you're willing to play Nancy one last time.
Miss me?
In late October 1994, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven returned to the famous horror series he created with a new nightmare. Wes had moved on from the Elm Street series after the first film, despite being asked to direct the follow-ups. He did get involved with Part 3, but New Line Cinema felt his ideas were too ambitious, but his screenplay did set the groundwork for what the film became. Wes Craven never wanted to see sequels to the original movie, and often stayed away from further involvement. In 1991, the sixth movie was released and was titled Freddy's Dead. The studio wanted Freddy to be killed off and to go out with a bang. Despite the movie doing well at the box office, it was panned by critics, and Freddy's final demise was a big letdown, especially with its attempts to have the final 15 minutes or so in 3D, which was still technology that didn't live up to expectations. The fans were desperate for another movie, and the pressure on New Line to deliver another sequel hit boiling point come 1993, with the 10th anniversary looming. Robert Shea wanted to get Wes Craven involved again, but Wes was still bitter about the lack of revenue earned from the sequels and video sales. He had created the character but never earned anything from the franchise, so they resolved their differences and Wes was given a percentage of the royalties to the series and merchandise. He wanted to bring Freddy into the real world instead of following on from Part 6. He was given a modest budget of $8 million, and the movie only managed to recoup $19 million worldwide, proving to be the least successful film in the entire series. New Nightmare gained strong reviews from critics who praised its story and attempts to do something different. New Nightmare arrived the same week as Pulp Fiction, which dominated the box office. This has often been cited as to why it didn't do very well on its initial release, and fans of Freddy Krueger regarded it as the most underrated film in the series. Before making New Nightmare, Wes Craven watched all of the Elm Street films. By the time he was finished, he claimed that he could not follow the storyline at all, and regarded them as weak sequels to his original movie. They were too cartoonish and weren't faithful to his original themes. He felt the best way to continue forward was to have Freddy Krueger in his new film invade the real world, and haunt the cast and crew responsible for his movies. The cast and crew loved the idea, and felt it was a love letter to the fans. It felt like a movie for them. Written under the working title of A Nightmare on Elm Street 7, The Ascension, this title was eventually dropped due to New Line Cinema not wanting it to be seen as a sequel. Wes Craven's original idea was supposed to have him on the run from Freddy, by riding around in a van driven by Michael Berryman from The Hills Have Eyes. Wes has his eyelids cut off as he struggles to stay awake, but chose instead to have him living in a life of luxury as he develops his new script. But the house used wasn't Wes Craven's, it was a place up in Malibu. This was the first time he appeared acting on screen. He felt people wouldn't really understand when he delivered his lines, because he admits he mumbles a lot, and he does talk quietly during his scenes, but thankfully he was still very audible. In this film, Freddy is depicted much closer to what Wes Craven had originally intended for the character, much more menacing, far less comical, and with an updated look to his face and outfit. Wes felt Freddy had deviated a lot from his original design. He didn't want Freddy to be a wisecracker and wanted to update his look with him having his skin split all over his face, instead of being burnt. In addition, the signature glove was redesigned for a more organic look, with the fingers resembling bones and having muscular textures in between. The glove ended up looking more like the original 1984 poster design. Wes is still unsure about the revamped look. In the documentary Never Sleep Again, he was still unsure if it was the right decision to change his appearance. I'm not sure if the fans were disappointed with the changes made, but in my opinion he certainly looks more creepy. The events in the film revolve around Heather Langenkamp having a stalker. In real life she did have a stalker, not associated from the Elm Street movies, but a fan of the TV series called Just the 10 of Us. Wes Craven got permission from Heather to weave it into the story, which has Freddy stalking her. Heather opened up her private life and professional life into this film, which was brave of her to do. Referencing the stalker phoning her may have had disastrous results, but thankfully there were no repercussions. All the earthquake sequences in the film were actually filmed 1 month prior to the Los Angeles quake of '94. A real earthquake struck only 2 weeks before the end of filming, so Wes sent out a second unit and double for Heather to film drive-by footage of actual quake-damaged areas of the city before the end of filming. With the earthquake being part of Freddy's return having this destruction of the city available to shoot, it made it easier for the filmmakers to create something epic for little to no money. In August of this year, Wes Craven sadly passed away due to suffering from brain cancer. He was 76 years old. Wes was a champion of horror cinema and reinvented the genre more than twice with his work. Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream both gave life to the often criticised formulaic genre and oversaturated market. Wes was always softly spoken and polite in interviews, and it was always a pleasure to listen to his thoughts on his craft and experiences in the industry. It's a sad loss, but I think with his work, I think he managed to make his mark on cinema and left a lasting legacy. With the cast of its movie and its theme, many of the actors play themselves. So Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, John Saxon play their real-life counterparts. Obviously the script is loosely based around what they do and get up to in reality. Heather is married to an FX artist and they run their own business, which is true, but the actor playing her husband is played by David Dawson. Her real husband didn't want to take part. And we have Wes Craven playing himself as the director. Robert Shea and Sarah Wisher, both from New Line Cinema, play themselves. And we have the odd cameo from actors who appeared from previous entries in the series. We have Miko Hughes playing Heather's son Dylan. Miko I'm sure many will remember from Kindergarten Cop, but he first popped up in Pet Sematary. He has continued acting and turned up in many big films such as Apollo 13 and Mercury Rising, but this was his first large speaking role. Tracy Middendorf plays Heather's friend Julie, who often babysits her son Dylan. She apparently was going to be Freddy's puppet in the film. He would use her to do his bidding, but her role was later changed before they began shooting. Fran Bennett plays Dr. Christine Hefner. Her character's surname was named after a member of the MPAA, who was the bane of Wes Craven's life and always made it difficult for him to release his films uncut. Fran was a very imposing woman and spent most of her time in theatre and performing Shakespeare. Her character is very concerned with Heather's parenting once Dylan is sent to hospital due to his lack of sleep and strange behaviour. This was the first movie in the Nightmare on Elm Street series that doesn't have any opening credits. It opens on the set of a new Elm Street movie, and a new Freddy hand is being created. The hand becomes alive and kills off members of the effects crew. Even Heather's husband is attacked. Heather wakes up during an earthquake and she spies a cut on Chase's finger, but he quickly dismisses the notion, saying it was cut during the quake. Heather has been receiving phone calls from an obsessed fan who calls and quotes Freddy nursery rhymes in an eerie Freddy-like voice, which coincides with a meeting she has with the head of New Line Cinema, Robert Shea, in which she's pitched an idea to reprise her role as Nancy in the definitive Nightmare film, which her husband Chase has been working on, unbeknownst to her at the time. She quizzes Bob Shea on the phone calls and strange things that have been happening since the announcement of a new film. Bob seems unsettled and won't disclose the issues he has been having. When she returns home, she sees Dylan having a fit. The babysitter Julie is struggling to control him. Dylan recites lines from Elm Street in a creepy voice like he is possessed. The frequent calls and Dylan's strange behaviour cause her to call Chase, who agrees to rush home from work but is going to take him 4 hours to get back. On his way home, Chase is struggling to stay awake and falls asleep while driving and is slashed by Freddy's claws, which results in his car crashing into a wall, killing him instantly. His death seems to affect Dylan even further, which causes concern for Heather's longtime friend and former co-star John Saxon. He thinks she and Dylan should seek therapy after Heather had another nightmare as Freddy attempts to steal Dylan away at Chase's funeral. She seeks advice on Robert Englund, who hasn't had a chance to read the new script, but has been experiencing nightmares as well, and has painted a portrait of the new incarnation of Freddy Krueger. Dylan's health continues to worsen, becoming increasingly paranoid about going to sleep and fearing Freddy Krueger, despite Heather having never shown him the movies. She visits Wes Craven for guidance and advice, and he suggests that Freddy is an entity drawn to his films, released after the series completed and is now focusing on Heather, his primary foe who he must take revenge and destroy. New Nightmare exhibits many different styles of visual effects. There is traditional optical work, miniatures for the end sequence, makeup prosthetics, CGI and front projection. The visual effects are certainly mixed in quality and some scenes haven't held up well over time. During the early years of CGI, New Nightmare incorporates computer graphics for a couple of scenes. This isn't the first film in the franchise to do this. Freddy's Dead did use CGI to help push the 3D visuals for its finale. The Digital Filmworks company handled the CGI. The motion control hand has CGI used to hide the puppeteer as it's moved around the set. When Chase is attacked by Freddy's claws appearing between his legs, they wanted this water-like ripple effect to use as a transition for his claws to emerge. It took many attempts for the effects team to work out the algorithm to make the effect work. During the end sequence, when Heather lands in Freddy's world, a matte painting is used with snippets of CG to animate flames and additional detail. The flames do look very flat and exhibit frame rate issues. This was a common problem during the early stages of CG. There are some quick morphing shots of Freddy used with CGI, especially when he is finished off, but it's a bit of an odd transition as he explodes. I don't think the effects team fully realised the effect Wes Craven wanted. K&B EFX Group provided the makeup work for Freddy. I think the new design works really well, especially in high contrast scenes with him in the shadows or in limited lighting near the end. But when he appears in the hospital, the lights are quite harsh on the makeup, making it look a bit rubbery and fake. But it doesn't really distract you or take you out of the scene, but I feel it works best in a nighttime setting. Their best work is the extended jaw of Freddy. It's so cool and inventive to see, and definitely something that would freak you out as a kid. The miniatures at the end as Freddy's world is destroyed is a bit hit and miss. There are some neat effects shots as it explodes, but with the choice of lenses and frame rate it gives away its scale, and just ends up looking like a cheap model. This was the first time Wes had used miniatures in a film, but I'm sure I've seen far better from the series with its use of models. Probably down to its budget and tight schedule, it's not as effective as it should be. The best visual effects for me were the front projection work, as Heather tries to save her son from the incoming traffic. Dodging the cars and ducking just in time as the lorry glides over her was very impressive. J. Peter Robinson composed the score to New Nightmare, a very talented composer who has worked on dozens of films and TV shows, and had worked with Wes Craven on Nightmare Cafe. His score is probably one of the best out of the series, maybe coming close to Brian May's work on Freddy's Dead. He uses the familiar theme that was introduced in the first film, but adds so much more to amplify the creepiness and atmosphere of New Nightmare. There appears to be more money spent on the score. It sounds far grander than what we've heard in the previous sequels. Near the end of the film, when Heather defeats Freddy and escapes his domain, the music is very heroic and triumphant, but it does take you out of the horror setting and feels more like a standard action movie finale. There is great tender moments of the score that work really well during the moments between Heather and her son, so the music is nicely balanced to complement the visuals, tone and the characters and their feelings. The soundtrack was released on CD and tape when the film came out, and isn't that difficult to obtain now. You can find it on iTunes. It's only about £8 to purchase, including 23 tracks of music. It's definitely worth getting hold of if you were impressed by the score. The film gave new life into the character of Freddy Krueger, and Wes Craven put a new twist on the horror genre. I first saw the film late one night on TV. I was in my mid-teens, and it was always one of those flicks that was on a bit too late, and you know you should have gone to bed because you had college the next morning. But with most horror you tend to expect the same thing. It's that predictable formula, and most cases I would just tune out. But shortly into it I became more fascinated by its premise, as Freddy attempts to break from the film world into our world. I felt invested in the characters and how his presence began to take over as he breaks free from the trappings of the dream world. I never really found the film to be scary, even in my younger years. I found it creepy in areas but never scary. Rewatching it recently, that view hasn't changed. I had gone back in preparation to review this film and watched all the movies in the long-running franchise, and in terms of horror, none of them really felt scary. They seemed very tame by today's standards. There is this push for gore that they do successfully, but nothing really unsettling to me. Many of the sequels felt rushed, and because of the tight schedules, the most interesting aspects of those movies were the dream sequences, but the stories themselves felt very thin and often incoherent and seemed desperate in their attempts to bring back Freddy again, despite apparently defeating him in the previous film. So with New Nightmare there isn't this desperate attempt to get into the dream world and for the director to show off what they can do on a visual scale, but instead tell a story that keeps you interested in how Freddy is trying to infiltrate reality. The movie doesn't try to follow the other films. It makes small references to them but kind of feels like a soft reboot of the series and uses the first film as its backbone. You could just ignore the films from 2 to 6 and go straight into this one and won't feel lost in the process. With the film feeling quite cinematic with its visual style and its structure with the characters, you don't fully believe it's in the real world. Wes chose not to have opening credits because it would dilute the reality of the real world and it would make the audience believe it was just a film. But I think more could have been done to push a stronger sense of reality, possibly going with a more documentary feel to it as the characters are interviewed or followed around doing their day-to-day lives, and we the audience begin to experience with them these strange occurrences and phone calls. I think seeing Freddy appearing under the bedsheets via recorded footage would have made it far more scary and believable. Maybe Wes would have approached it differently if he made it more recently, who knows. The movie keeps Freddy off screen for long periods of time, and he doesn't really come into full form until the hospital sequence, which is probably my favourite scene down to its inventiveness and the difficulty of shooting with rotating sets. They used a similar process in the first film, but it seems more polished in this sequel. With the other films they always wanted to show more of Freddy, so having less is not a bad thing. Because of the strengths of the characters and the story, you're not just constantly waiting for him to appear, it's a great build up to his final reveal. There are great comparisons to the events of the first film. It does bring back the telephone jump scare, Heather's hair goes white due to the stress she is under, Freddy coming out of the bed and her feet being stuck in the stairs as she struggles to save Dylan from Freddy. These are done to get Heather to accept that she is Nancy. There is this real clever moment when she meets John Saxon at her house, and there is this quick edit as he transforms into the role of her father, and his clothes have changed and so have hers. For Heather to become Nancy, she has to say, "I love you too, Daddy," and then boom, Freddy is free and she is teleported back to the original house from the movie series, but though the interior is the same as her current house. The grim fairy tale story connection is nicely played out. Heather reads Dylan the story of Hansel and Gretel. In the third act, Dylan leaves her sleeping tablets in reference to the breadcrumbs as she goes under the bedsheets to enter Freddy's underworld. With Freddy being shoved into the fire a bit like an oven, the clues to his demise are given to us early on, so Wes has sowed the seeds to the movie's final outcome. Freddy's world took on a radical change. jumping from the boiler room to a more Babylonian architecture. His home is a mix of different styles and mythology as you see Heather make her way through his lair. It felt fresh and helped push the idea that the demon that embodied Freddy had been around for centuries. Wes Craven always deals with underlining themes to his films, and a sense of childhood innocence is perfectly conveyed through Dylan. He knows more than his parents are willing to admit, and he is the key for Freddy's return. I like how Wes wrote into the story that Dylan uses his stuffed T-Rex toy to keep Freddy at bay from the end of his bed. There are always those moments as a kid when you saw something scary on TV and you think something might grab you from the end of your bed, so you keep your feet tucked away from the edge of the mattress. I remember doing silly things like that as a kid. So Wes had a firm understanding of what kids were scared of and used those moments throughout the film for Dylan to conquer those fears. With Dr. Hefner's character essentially being the voice of the MPAA and concerned parents in Wes Craven's mind regarding Heather's parenting and believing that she has exposed Dylan to her movies that has caused him to have these nightmares, Wes's argument to that notion was always that there were far more scary things in the real world and on the news that horror films could never match. Kids themselves loved the character of Freddy despite them not really knowing he was a child killer, but it was for them to conquer their own fears, so they no longer feared him. The basis of A New Nightmare became the building blocks for Wes Craven's Scream series, with horror films again being part of reality. The 1996 film combined comedy and the whodunit mystery, coupled with the violence of the slasher genre, to satirise the cliché of horror popularised in films such as Halloween and Friday the 13th. The film was considered unique at the time for featuring characters that were aware of real-world horror films, and openly discussed the cliché that Scream attempted to subvert. Scream was credited with revitalising the horror genre in the 90s, which many thought had had its day, due to the oversaturated market and endless sequels from 80s horror franchises. Freddy did come back a few years later, in the much anticipated Freddy vs Jason, that was a big success, and treated his origin story and his character with respect. It was just an excuse to see these two horror titans battle it out, and it was just a dumb horror movie, but was thoroughly entertaining. I'm surprised they didn't push forward with any more of these team-up movies. I know they hinted at a possible battle against Pinhead from Hellraiser and Ash from Evil Dead, but the legal problems of trying to get Freddy and Jason together was a tough enough task, so unfortunately any more of these will probably never happen. Michael Bay's production company tried to reboot Nightmare on Elm Street in 2010, which fans weren't desperate to see. It was successful at the box office by just being sold on the name of the film, but was slammed by critics and the followers of the series. It sucked on all levels and failed to capture the magic and tone of the first film. It's one of the worst kind of remakes that studios have produced in recent years, and now they're trying to reboot it again. They obviously haven't learnt their lesson. New Nightmare is a great entry to the series and successfully ends the story of Freddy Krueger. Robert Englund feels it's the best of the franchise, and when Wes Craven recorded the commentary for New Nightmare for the Laserdisc release, he felt it was his best movie to date. I think the performances in the movie are very good. Robert Englund is fantastic as usual, he knows the character better than anyone. Miko Hughes does a tremendous job and exhibits a great range at such a young age. Kids can be annoying in films, but thankfully with Wes's direction, that problem is not apparent. Heather really sells her performance, and you generally believe she's being put under great stress in coping with the belief that Freddy is not just a movie character, but also a threat to her and her family. With all the Freddy films, they have strong female leads that all exhibit great strength and always defeat him in the end, which is great. I think when it comes to horror, women are often the heroes, and in this, Heather really kicks ass. It's an extremely underrated film, and certainly needs to be re-watched if you haven't seen it in a long time. Yeah, it's not really scary, but does it really matter? No, it's all about the story, and that's what counts, and it certainly delivers. You can get the Blu-ray collection of the Elm Street series for a reasonable price on Blu-ray, and New Nightmare is included. If you want to know more about the series, I'd recommend picking up the Never Sleep Again documentary, which is over 4 hours long, and probably one of the best retrospectives on a movie series available, up there with the Alien documentaries. New Nightmare would be a great addition to your collection, and of course for your horror selection this Halloween.
Many of the symptoms of childhood schizophrenia are duplicated in children suffering from sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation can produce trance-like states, mechanical behavior.
I'm sleepy.
The child might report
Rex
being
woke
in
me
a
up.
twilight world.
Was fighting the mean old man with the claws.
You have no idea who this is calling?
Freddy, for all I know.
As in me?
No, it isn't you. It's scarier.
Darker. More evil?
How did you know?
He's decided to cross over out of films into our reality.
Nancy, Freddy's dead.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
Listen, Daddy, I've got a proposition for you. I'm gonna go and get the guy who did it. And I want you to be there to arrest him when I bring him out, okay?
Nancy, just tell me who did it. I'll go get him, baby.
Fred Krueger did it, Daddy.
Yeah, sure.
Miss me?
If you enjoyed the video, you can find more on my YouTube channel, and also you can follow me on Twitter. If you want to help support the channel, you can donate through Patreon and receive monthly perks such as updates on the latest news on my channel, early access to reviews and commentaries before they go live on YouTube. Even the smallest donation can help keep this channel going. Thank you.